Group. Hi, everybody. I hope everyone can hear me. My name's Susie. I'm the Director of Culture, Community, and Outreach for USA Weightlifting, and I want to thank you all for joining us today on this beautiful Saturday. At least I hope it's beautiful where you are. To learn a little bit from Monica Nelson. So Monica is a second-year master's student in kinesiology at the University of Maryland. She will be talking to us a little bit today about how Olympic weightlifters choose their weight classes, addressing weight loss induced problems in Olympic weightlifting, and what are some things that athletes and coaches need to talk about when they choose a weight class. So hopefully you guys will be able to take something away from this session today. If you have any friends who are interested in watching it that were not able to join, you will be able to access today's session as well as our other speaker series events on the USAW Learning Academy, which you can access through BARS. A couple of housekeeping rules. While Monica is presenting, please make sure to keep your microphones off. She'll go through her presentation and we will do a Q&A at the end. At that point in time, you can unmute yourselves to ask any questions. If you want to just drop something in the chat as a reminder to go back to, you can definitely do that as well. Other than that, enjoy the session and I will hand it over to Monica.
All right, thank you, Susie, for getting us started. So I'm going to go ahead and start my screen share over to the PowerPoint, and we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so first of all, thank you all for coming. I'm really excited to share this study with you. My name is Monica Nelson, and I'm going to be talking today about my study about how Olympic weightlifters are choosing their weight classes, and more importantly, how we make these weight class choices work a little bit better for athletes. Now, in terms of a presentation outline, Susie already did a great job introducing me. I'm going to give a little bit more of an about me and kind of lead that into why I did this study about how Olympic weightlifters are choosing their weight classes. I'm going to continue on with, a study overview. This is effectively going to be a research presentation, the things I found and how we relate that to make weight classes work a little better. So we'll go over my findings, and there are two main findings I'll be talking through, which is first, the stated rationales for how Olympic weightlifters were choosing their weight classes, as well as their assumptions about how body composition and strength related to each other and how that could lead to some problems in weight class choice. Finally, wrapping things up, based on my findings, I'll give some recommendations for athletes and coaches about how to choose weight classes, and then we'll have time for a Q&A at the end. Now, as far as who I am, what I'm about, Susie's already introduced me a little bit. A couple more little details. That is a picture of me from the last time I competed at nationals, the one and only time. I've been training and competing in Olympic weightlifting for a bit over 7 years now. I have my USAW level 2 certification, and actually as of yesterday, I've graduated with my master's in kinesiology from the University of Maryland with a specialization in physical cultural studies. And physical cultural studies is effectively the social and cultural study of sport, exercise, fitness, and the body. And now that I finished with my MA, I'll be continuing on as a PhD student at the University of Waikato, which is in New Zealand, where I'll be in the Department of Health, Sport, and Human Performance, kind of continuing on in the research that I do about strength sports. And my research focus, the thing that I hope to continue researching as a PhD student and beyond, is more the social and cultural determinants of strength development. And you'll kind of get a sense for exactly what that looks like as I go through this presentation. But an easy way to kind of conceptualize that is, I'm interested in how strength athletes are making choices about their bodies and how that results in, things that help their strength development and things that maybe hinder it. And now we have the question of why bother studying weight classes, especially for Olympic weightlifters? The study started out from personal experience. Again, I've been competing in the sport, training in the sport for a bit over 7 years now. And I used to compete as a 58. And there were two, kind of occurrences that made me kind of take a step back and go, what am I doing and why am I trying to stay in this weight class? In the first instance, my one and only nationals, I had to cut about 3.5 kilos to get down to 58. And, I did, dieting down a little bit. I still had to lose, 2.5, 3 kilos that last week. I did water cutting and I didn't eat or drink anything the last 24 hours before weighing in. I remember sitting in the lobby and I was, just waiting to go to weigh in, and I stood up. I lost peripheral vision. I went and I weighed in, I barely made weight, and 5 minutes later, stuffing my face, I remember thinking to myself, I bet I could make it to 53, because then I would have abs, more permanently. And if I can just hold on to my strength, I would be so competitive. Fortunately, I decided, not to go with 53. I think I would have died. But the 58 kilo weight class itself began to become really problematic for me about 8 months later, where I kind of decided, in the run up to the next nationals and qualifying for it again, I didn't want to be that heavy again. So I wanted to walk around as close to 58 as possible. And so what I did was I started eating less and then less and then less than that. And I was, walking around closer to 58. My lifts were going okay. I was hitting the numbers I needed to hit to qualify for nationals. But weird things started happening. My heart rate dropped to a really unhealthily low level. I started getting lightheaded, going on short walks, maybe 10-minute walks on flat ground. And I had a hard time sleeping because I was so hungry all the time. But I didn't tell my coach any of this because I was still hitting the numbers I needed to hit. Things seemed like they were on the whole going okay. And then I blew out a ligament in my elbow during a qualifying competition. I had to have surgery to repair it. And I realized at that point, it took disordered eating. It took, low energy availability. It took getting severely injured for me to realize I could not be a 58 anymore. I needed to go up a weight class. And the question was, why did it take so long? Why did it take so much for me to realize 58 was not a good weight class for me? Now, aside from my personal evidence, I also knew that I had anecdotal evidence that I wasn't the only person doing this. Other weightlifters I knew were making somewhat weird, decisions about their bodies and would usually wait until things got bad before they went up a weight class. And finally, as I got to grad school and started thinking about what I wanted to research, I started looking into it. And there is no pre-existing data about how Olympic weightlifters are choosing their weight classes, the prevalence of disordered eating, disordered bodily practices among strength athletes. It doesn't exist. There is nothing. And so what I decided to do was to do a study about how Olympic weightlifters are choosing their weight classes. The research question that really guided the study was, how are Olympic weightlifters weighing all of their competitive and their personal incentives for choosing a particular weight class? And you'll note at this point that this is kind of developed to be a body image study. And that's what it started out as. And as we'll kind of get to in the second half of my findings, it went way beyond body image to talk about how Olympic weightlifters are actually conceptualizing the relationship between body composition and strength and athleticism. In terms of my research method, I did a qualitative study. I did in-depth 45 to 80-minute interviews with 8 male and 8 female Olympic weightlifters in the US. And I tried to sample a wide range of weight classes and ability levels to kind of get a full spectrum of what are Olympic weightlifters doing. I sampled everyone from ultra lightweight weight classes through super heavyweight, and I had an almost even balance of elite and recreational athletes. And elite I defined as anyone who had competed in at least one international competition, and recreational was anyone who competed at any level below that. Now, as far as the participants I was looking for and brought into the study, they had to be senior athletes, 18 plus years old. They had to have spent at least 3 years competing or training primarily in Olympic weightlifting, as their primary one and only sport. And they had to have competed in at least 3 competitions, any level. Basically, I wanted people who had started to think through, how can I leverage my body weight in order to become more competitive and to become better at the sport? Oh, and the last thing I really want to mention here about research method is that at times I'm going to mention names, I'm going to mention weight classes, I'll kind of bring in participant quotes. All identifying information about these participants has been changed. These are all pseudonyms. If I mention a weight class, that was not the athlete's actual weight class, and so on and so forth. All right, so the first finding of the study was really looking at, okay, what are Olympic weightlifters saying about how they're choosing their weight class? What are the rationales they're bringing in? Is aesthetics or bodily appearance anything of a factor? And so, as you could probably predict, competitiveness was the #1 thing that these weightlifters were thinking about. They wanted to become more competitive. And so things like leveraging their body weight to qualify for competitions, to avoid competitive peers in, either higher or lower weight classes. And finally, trying to figure out what body weight will help them to improve their performance over time. Those were all the #1 considerations for them. Now, there was consideration of appearance and aesthetics. Athletes did have particular preferences as well as needs for how their bodies needed to look to kind of live everyday life, especially for recreational athletes. And I'll talk about this in a bit. recreational athletes also had job-based bodily requirements and need to look a particular way in order to appear professional. Now, as far as how important these factors were, competitiveness won out by a landslide. Appearance was, at average, maybe 10% of an Olympic weightlifter's weight class choice. Competitiveness was the only thing they really thought about, how to leverage their body weight to become more competitive and more successful in the sport. But what appearance did was sometimes it could push them in one way or in another in order to choose their weight class. And so what I'm going to kind of go over is, this next component of the PowerPoint is I'm going to kind of talk through what is the bodily strategy for choosing a particular weight class, for going down in body weight or for going up in weight. Because I'm assuming that, all people who see this, some might be looking to figure out, what is the bodily strategy for going down in weight class? How do you leverage your body weight to become more competitive? So I want to talk through that here. So what Olympic weightlifters were doing, when they chose a weight class based on its, strategic capabilities, what they were looking to get out of it is, they weighed a number of different factors against each other, risks and incentives, both, decreasing their body weight and increasing their body weight, as well as, where are my competitive peers, so on and so forth. And there really isn't a name for this kind of balancing of different factors, this calculation of, what body weight is going to work best for me. And so I've been calling it the performance algorithm. Take it or leave it. That's what I've been calling it. So the risks, the incentives and the risks that Olympic weightlifters weighed in terms of thinking about, all right, will a weight class decrease work for me? Will, can I, maintain my body weight and do a small cut down to a weight class? On the one hand, they had the incentives of doing so. The way qualification for high level competitions in sport works is the more body mass you have, the heavier you are, the more weight you're going to have to lift in order to qualify for competitions and to do well in those competitions. So going down in body weight meant that Olympic weightlifters would have an easier time qualifying for competitions as well as placing in competitions. Now, alongside that, there were also, some physiological benefits. The primary one that people talked about was the potential for faster Olympic lifts. You're moving around less body weight. It's easier to move your body weight around and under the bar. And so you might be able to move a couple more kilos just by having dropped a couple of kilos yourself. However, there were risks that came along with decreasing body weight, and Olympic weightlifters had to kind of figure out, what makes it not worth it for me to continue going down in body weight. The potential risks were, the potential for muscle and strength loss. By eating at maintenance or specifically a deficit, it becomes significantly more difficult, if not impossible, to put on more muscle, and strength gain just becomes more difficult. And that goes the same for, eventually hitting a strength plateau. A lot harder to get stronger if you're not eating at maintenance or a surplus. There were also issues of over time having trouble making weight, if you're going through sport for a number of years, the assumption is that you're gonna put on some more muscle, and that's muscle you don't want to lose as you're going down in weight class or going down in body weight, and that can just get harder and harder and harder the more years you put into the sport. Now, the weightlifters in the study also recognized that there was also a balancing act, to think about when thinking about going through weight class increases or gaining weight over the course of their athletic careers. In terms of incentives, you could get potentially significantly stronger. You could put on a significant amount of muscle while going up to the next weight class. There's also potential for maximal recovery during training, breaking down muscle fibers by training and training hard. Eating at a caloric surplus is a great way to make sure that recovery happens as fast as you need it to. And then finally, and this is a little bit more anecdotal in the discussions I had, but there was also the potential for a decreased injury risk, less risk of getting hurt because you're eating at a surplus. Now, there were a number of risks to consider as well, and this is effectively the inverse of decreasing body weight. As you go up in body weight, harder to qualify for competitions. Athletes kind of had to reckon with the fact that they might lose some competitiveness. It might get harder to qualify for competitions. And alongside that, the potential physiological risks are, you get heavier, your lifts might get a little bit slower. And finally, that your lift biomechanics might change a little bit. You have new mass in different places. It can get, your lifts can change a little bit. Now, notably, what's interesting here is that the lifters in the study talked about changed lift biomechanics happening only for weight gain, whereas the same is arguably true for weight loss. And now that we've kind of talked through that, how Olympic weightlifters were talking through, what is the strategy for competitiveness in body weight? How do I leverage my body weight to get more competitive? we can talk through this, what role did appearance, did aesthetics play in a weightlifter's choice of weight class? And the thing I want to start with is that this wasn't just women who were considering how their body looked when they were choosing a weight class. This was men as well. They tended to frame it in terms of vanity. Something that holds me back from wanting to go up a weight classes. Vanity might start to come into play. And effectively, a good way to think about that is that the lifters in the study tended to want to look like the Thor on the left, then the Thor on the right. They tended to want to skew towards being leaner than going up in body weight and maybe having to deal with issues of body image or vanity. Now, women had that to an extent, but it was also different. The female body ideal tends to be, pretty lean and very much emphasizes not having muscle. And I didn't have a single female weightlifter in the study who said, I don't want to put on muscle because I don't want to be bulky. Every woman in the study wanted more muscle. They would love more muscle. Where they did start to run into issues with physical appearance was with their need to look a certain way because others were holding them to female body ideals. One particular notable example was Anne, who said that she already got catcalled for her legs in her neighborhood constantly. And that was one reason why she just really did not want to go up in body weight. Her coach was very accepting and interested in having her go up a weight class, but she didn't feel like she could cope with having a heavier body in everyday life. And so she held back from going up in body weight. Now, the last thing to talk about, and this is really something that affected recreational athletes the most, was a need for athletes' bodies to look a certain way in order to kind of get through having a job. Their jobs kind of dictated that they needed to have a certain physical appearance. Eric was a good example. He worked in a high-powered job where physical appearance meant that he had to look professional. He couldn't have extra body weight. And so we framed it this way, Ilya and Lasha just lift. So yeah, if you're just in sweatpants, busting out of a pair of chinos isn't an issue for you. It was for him, and it was a reason why he really pushed back on going up a weight class or going up in body weight. And so the first major finding from the study was that among the athletes I talked to, weight loss was really prioritized over, going up in body weight, going up in weight class. And that's fine. I'm not here to tell anyone that we should get rid of cutting weight, that, it's not functional for the sport, because the fact of the matter is that cutting weight is functional for the sport. It's a way to become more competitive. It is a strategy to get more competitive. The fact that Olympic weightlifters were kind of tacking on this, I can also achieve my appearance-based needs and my preferences along with it, that's fine. This was not a major issue. And so what we can really take away from this first set of findings is, first, that Olympic weightlifters can have multiple reasons for wanting to be in a particular weight class, and that's fine. However, if coaches are telling athletes, you only have to think about competitiveness, don't think about how your body looks, that's not functional. The athletes in the study, especially the recreational athletes, they had external reasons, living the rest of their life kind of reasons for why they couldn't go up in body weight, why they couldn't look a certain way. Assuming or telling them that they just need to think about competitiveness means that the athletes are just going to go behind their coach's back to try and achieve that bodily appearance that they need alongside competitiveness. Second major takeaway, this is not a female-only issue. A lot of people tend to assume that it's just women saying, I just don't want to be bulky. It was not women saying, I don't want to be bulky. It was men and women having needs and preferences for how their bodies looked. And finally, as you probably could have anticipated, this was primarily, but not exclusively, a recreational athlete issue. And at this point in the study, and at this point in the findings, you might be thinking like, okay, so this is recreational athletes choosing appearance as well as competitiveness. And so there's nothing we can do about elite athletes. They're just choosing their body compositions, their weight classes for competitiveness. Unfortunately, there was a problem. And there's a problem with assuming that we can't do anything for competitive elite Olympic weightlifters. The problem that I kept coming back to as I looked through my findings, looked through the data, was that the weightlifters that were part of the study tended to only go through weight class and even minor body weight increases when they were forced into them. And that was despite the fact that their performance had plateaued or really declined noticeably over the course of however long they'd been in their weight class. And the things that would happen in order to force them up to the next weight class was they would miss weight, be unable to compete at high level competitions. They would bomb out at high level competitions as a result of weight loss, or they'd go 1 for 6 or 2 for 6. They would get injured as a result of weight loss. They would have multi-year strength plateaus that they just work through and never go up in body weight. And finally, they would just straight up burn out on the sport as a result of cutting weight. And this is an issue because it was happening to everyone. This was happening to elite and to recreational weightlifters. This was happening to female and male weightlifters. And it was happening even when the athlete's coach approved of weight class and body weight increases and kind of said, like, yeah, we should go up in body weight over time. This still tended to happen. Athletes still would not go up in body weight or in weight class unless they were really and truly forced into it. And so what that does is that it really throws out this scale that I talked about earlier, where weightlifters were, prioritizing weight class maintenance or loss over weight gain. This only really works if the weightlifters were actually increasing their competitiveness by cutting weight. If their performances were plateauing or declining, but they were staying, they were continuing to cut, they were continuing to just maintain that weight class, this stops working. However, it also could not be explained by that, that little bit of concern over appearance, because again, this wasn't elite Olympic weightlifters saying, hey, I just feel like I want to have abs, and so that's why I'm going to keep cutting weight. That wasn't it. So the question is, where was this coming from? Why did elite and recreational weightlifters kind of work through this declining or plateauing performance and refuse to go up in body weight? And the thing that I really came to was that weightlifters tended to use ideas from outside of Olympic weightlifting to define how body composition related to competitiveness and to strength. And so the first thing that I need to do in kind of parsing through this, how Olympic weightlifters would think about their bodies and how they could get stronger over time and why they were throwing out weight gain, is first I kind of need to talk through the basic physiology of how strength gain works. And this is going to be an extremely basic level. There are likely those of you out there who can tell me all about the ifs, ands, and buts and the little nitpicky parts of physiology of strength gain, but I need us to focus on these two major ones, and how they relate to body composition. So the first way to really get stronger through physiology is through improving neuromuscular control. And that's an improved connection between your brain and your muscles as you learn movement patterns. So you're sending faster signals from your brains through motor neurons to muscles, effectively just increasing that speed, mind-body connection. And what that means is that you're contracting muscle fibers more forcefully, you're contracting them in sync with each other, and you're contracting them in better patterns. So that's improvements to your technique and speed. Now, how that relates to body composition is that you can do this at any point of body composition, any phase of it. You can achieve it during body weight increases, during decreases, and during body weight maintenance. Now, the second major way to gain strength is through hypertrophy, which is an increased size of your muscle fibers. And basically what that results in is increased force of muscle contraction and effectively just a higher baseline of strength. Now, the way that hypertrophy best happens is when you combine a caloric surplus with resistance training. And where this gets interesting, where Olympic weightlifters started to break this down, is that caloric surplus that you have to eat at least a little bit, it results in muscle and fat gain. It does not matter, how much protein you're eating. You are still likely going to gain some muscle and some fat. That fat doesn't have to be permanent, but you are going to gain fat mass as you gain muscle. Now, we can see how this tracks into Olympic weightlifting, and it tracks in really well, both of these two methods of the physiology of strength gain, as we can see from our 4 Olympians from the Rio Olympics and 3 of our upcoming Olympians from the Tokyo Olympics. You can, successfully and functionally compete in Olympic weightlifting at a wide variety of body compositions, from lower body fat all the way up through higher body fat. We can see that, that physiology of strength gain, neuromuscular control, hypertrophy can be applied at different points in Olympic weightlifting career and strategically in order to guarantee maximum competitiveness, maximum strength. However, the problem that I was really running into is that Olympic weightlifters were expressing ideas that sometimes worked with this physiology of strength gain and sometimes really didn't. And so I started trying to parse through, what ideas about body composition and competitiveness were they talking about that really worked with the physiology of strength gain, and which ones really didn't, and where were those coming from? And so, when I talked with the people in this study about, their weight classes, why they might decide not to go up a weight class, so on and so forth, they did recognize, this spectrum of functional body compositions for Olympic weightlifting, and they appreciated that you could be leaner and you can be successful, you can be heavier, and that you would get stronger. More mass equals more mass moved. Dylan, for example, said the ideal body for a weightlifter is just a mixed bag of people. Alongside that, what was interesting was that there was never any discussion about there being an upper limit to a functional body fat percentage for Olympic weightlifting, but there was definitely discussion of a lower limit to body fat percentage. And that effectively was just, you just don't want to look like a bodybuilder. You know, Andrea says, you want to look taut and tight while lifting, you can, but you're probably not going to move that much weight overhead. So, you know, alongside the fact that the weightlifters in the study, you know, they looked up to or admired heavier weightlifters and say, yep, they're moving more weight than I ever will. And they would even encourage their teammates to go up in weight classes and body weight. You know, all of this kind of discussion of the functionality of multiple kinds of body compositions, it all just implied that these weightlifters kind of recognize that you put on more weight, you're going to get stronger. Hypertrophy, that's how it happens, alongside and constantly improving neuromuscular control. Great. Where this started to really break down, though, was kind of applying this acceptance of weight gain equals strength gain to their own bodies. For most of the weightlifters in the study, body weight increase was never the right choice for them. And a lot of the time that seemed to come down to a fact that the weightlifters in the study usually weren't sure about how body fat and weight gain positively related to strength. Ellen, for example, demonstrates kind of this like lack of surety about exactly what the process is in order to get stronger. You know, I put on a kilo and I PR'd my back squat, so it's just like, who knows? Getting bigger in itself won't do, but at some level, the stronger you get physically, the larger, and you're directly correlating that to your strength, sure, maybe. Effectively, what I got was a lot of anecdotal discussion of, you know, oh, I hear that if you go up in body weight or you have a little bit of extra body fat, you know, maybe your recovery is better, you know, maybe you're less likely to get injured. But usually that would be followed up with, you know, oh, but that's anecdotal. I don't know that for sure. And so in the absence of a surety of what that relationship was between weight gain and body fat and strength gain, is what the weightlifters in the study tended to do was bring in outside ideas, you know, ideas from outside of Olympic weightlifting that didn't really work with the physiology of of strength gain. They'd bring those ideas into Olympic weightlifting and use those to frame their choice of body composition and their rationale for why they stayed at a weight class. And there were two major perceptions of body fat in particular that really framed this lack of interest in going up in body weight. The first was the belief that fat mass was always unhealthy, regardless of how lean the athlete was. Any body fat they put on would be unhealthy. Noah, for example, said that, you know, since my body wants to walk around at 78, the difficult will probably be bulking up to about 83, which is what I should be walking at in a healthy way. Usually when weightlifters use the term healthy, they meant fat. So muscle mass, always healthy, fat mass, always unhealthy. It didn't matter how little fat mass they might put on by gaining weight. The other thing I also tended to hear a lot was the belief that fat mass hurts athletic performance. And Ricardo here is a great example. Came into the sport as a super heavyweight. And he says, after being exposed to CrossFit and then going on Instagram and looking at CrossFitters and weightlifters, I was like, you know what would be a good weight class? The 94 kilo weight class. He thought that he should lose over 100 pounds. He wasn't even going to stop at the 105 weight class. He felt like he should go all the way down to the 94 weight class in order to be competitive, in order to be good at the sport, because he had this perception that fat mass just hurts your lifting strength. And so the question is, where are these perceptions coming from? They very clearly can't come from Olympic weightlifting, where, you know, these athletes, you know, thought that spectrum of body compositions and performance was great. You know, you could be heavier, you could have a higher body fat percentage and be successful. Same thing for lower body fat percentage. So where are these beliefs about fat mass coming from? And I found they came from two major places. One, from American diet and health culture at large, that really stigmatizes having any body fat at all. You know, says that, you know, if you have any body fat, what's wrong with you? You're unhealthy. You need to be perpetually dieting. You always need to be perpetually lean. And at the same time, you know, this diet and health culture also implies that fat mass hurts athletic performance. You know, it's unproductive mass, it's fluff, it's inefficient. Now, athletes also tended to get the belief that fat mass hurts athletic performance from their participation in previous sports. And so you could see pretty clearly, you know, or imagine pretty clearly that the weightlifters coming from wrestling and CrossFit tended to have a much different idea about how body fat and athleticism works than people who were coming in from, say, football. And so between these two beliefs, you know, that fat mass is always unhealthy, that fat mass hurts athletic performance, there was this overwhelming distrust of weight gain and body fat, and a general belief that if they gained weight, that they wouldn't gain any strength. And so as a result of this distrust in weight gain and body fat, there were Olympic weightlifting study had a number of beliefs about that relationship between body composition and strength that resulted in a tendency to develop certain bodily practices to avoid mass gain explicitly, a tendency to alternately downplay and emphasize the physiological signals from weight gain and from weight loss, and as well a tendency to ignore the mental and emotional impacts of cutting weight for a long period of time, and that led to burnout. Now, there were 4 major beliefs about body fat and strength that the weightlifters in the study tended to have. Some of them are contradictory, and yet they all imply that body mass gain should be avoided at all costs because it won't result in strength gain. First was the belief that weight loss wouldn't result in strength loss. One of my interviewees, Dylan, for example, he lost about 20 pounds leading into a competition in the last 2 or 3 weeks before that competition. And he didn't think he was going to lose any strength while he did that. That is not what happened. The second belief is that if you gain any weight, you won't gain any strength. Weightlifters just did not trust that if they gained any weight, that they would actually get any stronger. Mostly because they thought that if they gained any weight, it was just going to be body fat, no muscle at all. Third belief, that if you gain any fat while gaining muscle, you did it wrong. So effectively, if weightlifters started to go up in body weight and they saw any fat mass, they felt like they needed to stop gaining weight immediately and actually lose weight again, and then try again to gain muscle supposedly the right way. And then finally, there was a belief that poor performances were always due to technique problems and not strength loss. So Dylan, who I talked about in the first example, who lost 20 pounds leading into a competition, went 2 for 6, hit bare minimum lifts. First thing he said when he walked off the platform was my technique that bad? And actually had to be convinced that no, you lost a lot of strength and you cannot do that weight class anymore. Now, these 4 beliefs translated into bodily practices that are always explicitly aimed at reducing mass gain or avoiding it entirely. The first was a tendency to take steps to reduce unexpected body weight, and those were things that were often off program and without telling their coaches. Anne, for example, said that she started sitting a little bit heavier, had gained some unexpected weight, and she freaked out. And so she started doing some CrossFit workouts and some cardio to kind of pull her body weight back down. And this was despite the fact that she had a coach who was very into having her gain weight, said, yeah, you would probably do great at the next weight class up. Why don't we think about going up in body weight? Instead, she didn't expect the body weight and started trying to get rid of it immediately. The other bodily practice was a tendency to avoid particular food groups by stigmatizing them and associating them with fat gain. So, for example, Brienne here did have to go up a weight class, was forced into it. And what she did was she stigmatized carbohydrates, which she, kind of drew on these American, diet culture ideas that carbs are bad, carbs are evil, carbs make you fat. It's like, well, no, you just need to be eating at a caloric surplus and that'll help you gain mass. But what she did was she stigmatized carbohydrates, and she said at a different point of her interview that she started eating 225 grams of protein a day, which is fine. You're eating at a caloric surplus. I'm not here to advocate for a particular diet, but I can tell you that starting to stigmatize different food groups is one of the ways in which individuals start ending up with disordered eating patterns. And finally, the thing that I started to see in terms of bodily practices, and this happened mostly among men, interestingly enough, was men would start to exclusively emphasize improving their technique over ever improving their baseline strength. A good example here was Calvin, who was in a weight class for a number of years that he had to cut down to. It was a little bit of a challenge, but he could do it. But then the weight classes got restructured. He would have had to cut a couple more kilos to make it into the new weight class, and he went, I can't do that. Went up to the next weight class, and it was at that point that he realized that he hadn't actually tried to get stronger in years. He'd been focusing on technique-based training to just try and eke out 1 more kilo, maybe 2 on his best lifts, and to use that for years and years and years. Now, where things start to get concerning was a tendency to downplay bodily signals that were arising from weight loss. Take, for example, Dylan, again, did that 20-pound weight cut, and he brought in from a previous sport a mentality that all those negative physiological signals he was getting, those were all in his head and his performance would be fine. He said, cut weight, I feel miserable. I can barely walk, I can barely stand. But you know what, it's all in your head. And he brought that exact same mindset to weightlifting, and other weightlifters would do this too. There was a tendency to kind of work through these extremely long periods of feeling bad while training because they didn't really believe that they would lose any strength from cutting weight or that they would gain any strength from gaining weight. And where this gets concerning is that some of these physiological signals strongly overlap with low energy availability, which is among athletes, this tendency to operate in a chronic caloric deficit by undereating and or overtraining. And if you continue doing that for long enough, there are some pretty severe physiological impacts, including detriments to performance. And weightlifters will kind of overlook these. And so some of the symptoms, and I'm going to recommend later in this, at the very end of this presentation, that these are symptoms that athletes and coaches need to know, is that, low energy availability looks like chronic fatigue during and after training, always being tired, having poor recovery, having a low appetite, having recurrent injuries that never really seem to go away, and for women, menstrual dysfunction. And now you notice that I'm not really talking about the female athlete triad here. The female athlete triad is really important to talk about. However, what I want to emphasize here is that female and male Olympic weightlifters are susceptible to low energy availability, and that is based on your beliefs about what kind of body composition you think is going to translate to higher performance. Now, on the flip side of this coin was a tendency to emphasize the importance of negative physiological signals from weight gain. So weightlifters worked through long periods where their lifts were plateaued, they felt bad during training, their recovery was bad, because they didn't think that they would lose any strength by cutting weight and that they wouldn't gain any strength by gaining weight. So on the flip side of that, they would emphasize how powerful, and how much they wanted to avoid these negative physiological signals from weight gain. Sophia, for example, said, I don't feel as good when I'm 1.5 kilos heavier, my lifts feel slower, my pull-ups are hard, so on and so forth. And that's fine. It's entirely valid that those things got more difficult as she gained weight. What's notable, however, is that Sophia would regularly cut up to 5 kilos down to her, pretty low weight class. And at one point she did it twice in a month. She said her body was screaming at her. She was having a horrible time. She described a component of it as being PTSD city. And yet when it came to, when she was forced up into the heavier weight class, she did not want to gain any weight past what she described as her natural body weight, because these physiological signals felt so important to her, as opposed to the negative signals from cutting weight. Now, perhaps the most concerning thing here was the tendency to ignore mental and emotional health that was developed from cutting weight. And what's the most concerning about it is that this was happening to elite and to recreational weightlifters, elite weightlifters that we want to represent us on the international stage. Jordan, for example, said that her weight cutting felt like it controlled her life. I was seriously contemplating just stopping the sport altogether because it was emotionally draining to be that low in body fat. It was something similar for Ryan, where when he started going up in body weight, finally went up a weight class, he started enjoying training again. You sort of feel free. I'm just going in the gym and I'm just trying to get stronger. But athletes would work through those negative mental and emotional, feelings from cutting weight until things got really, really bad. So wrapping this all up, those are the key findings from the study, that kind of chain of events. But I want to kind of run through really quickly to make sure we understand how I got from A to Z over the course of this second half of this presentation. So first, even if they believe that weightlifters could be successful at a range of body compositions, looking that weightlifters can be successful at low or high body fat, the weightlifters in the study tended to believe that they wouldn't gain strength if they gained weight. Second, weightlifters used ideas from previous sports as well as American diet and health culture to assume that there was a negative relationship between body fat and strength. So if they gained any body fat, their strength was going to decrease, their performance, their competitiveness would automatically decrease. 3, that assumed negative relationship between body fat and strength led to beliefs, practices, and a tendency to ignore mental and physiological feedback from cutting weight or from maintaining a weight class that was no longer really working for them. And finally, big key takeaway, regardless of their demographic, regardless of their ability level, their weight class, their gender, weightlifters tended to stay in weight classes past the point of functionality, and they really had to be forced out of it. And this chain of events is why that was happening. Now, to summarize this entire presentation, first set of findings was really all aimed around talking about how Olympic weightlifters choose their weight classes. What are their stated rationales? Why are more weightlifters choosing, to lose weight in the name of competitiveness versus gain weight? And again, this is fine. Weightlifters are choosing, competitiveness via weight loss. That's a strategy in the sport. If it aligns with their appearance-based needs and preferences, that's fine as well. However, we also talked about where this breaks down. And to try and explain that avoidance of body weight and weight class increases, despite performance plateaus and declines. You know, again, where that scale stops working, that balance stops working, where if weightlifters are choosing competitiveness via weight loss, that's fine. But when they're no longer competitive and they're staying in that weight class anyways, why is that happening? And talk through how Olympic weightlifters are bringing in ideas from outside of the sport in order to choose their weight class and in order to rationalize never going up in body weight. And so now we're at the final component of this presentation. What do athletes and coaches need to talk about when they choose a weight class? Going back to that first part of the presentation, you know, there needs to be that recognition that athletes choose weight classes for multiple reasons, especially at the recreational level, but it also should be addressed among elite athletes to make sure that elite athletes are feeling okay about how their bodies are looking as they're doing this. There's, you know, on the one hand, talking through competitive aspirations of the athlete, as well as a need to talk through athletic, you know, or aesthetic needs, as well as preferences, because saying that athletes shouldn't have those while they're choosing a weight class is ignoring the fact that you really can't get rid of aesthetic needs. Finally, you know, going to that second half of the presentation, athletes and coaches need to talk about both of their assumptions about body composition and strength. Where are those assumptions coming from? Do they actually come from Olympic weightlifting? Do they come from the athlete's previous sport? Do they come from, you know, more mainstream, more general, you know, diet and health culture? And finally, athletes and coaches need to talk through, how does strength gain actually happen? There needs to be a discussion of at least the very basic physiology of what's going on. Are athletes willing at some point in their career to kind of go up in body weight, to go up in weight class when it becomes necessary? And what is that going to look like? Do they understand that body fat gain is going to happen as they try to get stronger? And so finally, I've got some strategies that I recommend for coaches and athletes. First is coaches do need to move beyond the narrative of don't cut weight unless you're competing in something big. The number one piece of advice that I heard being passed from coaches to athletes about how to choose a weight class is just don't cut weight unless you're qualifying for something. If you're qualifying for AO finals, you're qualifying for nationals, you're qualifying for international competitions, don't cut weight, it's not important. And they're right, and this is a good place to start. However, it doesn't do enough to actually address what the athlete assumes about body composition and strength. If you're not addressing, you know, okay, you know, how does strength gain look over time and how are we going to cope with this? Athletes will still kind of bring in their assumptions about what strength gain looks like, about what body composition and athleticism, you know, how they relate to each other, and use that to kind of manipulate their body composition without the coach knowing. And then finally, and this is something I never heard from athletes, but I would love to see more of, was I would love to see athletes and coaches start to make escape plans from a given weight class before things get bad. You know, don't wait for the athlete to burn out. Don't wait for them to get injured, have poor competitions, but actually plan, you know, okay, so if these symptoms of low energy availability start happening to you, if things start to look bad, this is the point at which we need to cut our losses and say it is time to go up a weight class, rather than, you know, that athlete having a horrible competition and being forced up a weight class and losing competitiveness for years and having to evaluate if they really want to stay in the sport at all. I would love it if athletes and coaches actually started thinking through, before things get bad, to maintain your competitiveness as much as we can, what do we need to think about in terms of when we should start going up a weight class or trying out some increases in body weight and seeing if you get stronger. And so that's it for my presentation. I've got my references. There are a couple of articles in here that I highly recommend if you've got any interest in, you know, how a low energy availability works or what it looks like, as well as what it looks like in order to gain strength over time through hypertrophy. And that's it. Open to any and all questions, comments, and stories.
It looks like Ashley raised her hand.
I think I just meant to applaud if this is the Ashley that you're referring to, but I do have a question. I was curious, is this published?
I am working on it right now. As I defended my thesis not too long ago, and I'm kind of working through the publication process. I've got things written up, submitted to journals, currently in revisions. Awesome. Working on the getting published part.
Cool, congrats on that. Also, I'm also getting my PhD, so I understand the struggle, and that's a really big accomplishment. So
thank you.
Yeah,
the struggle is definitely real.
Being able to cite this in the future.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's really informative.
Thank you. There's another study that was actually done about female powerlifters in the UK that touches on similar things, but doesn't quite get at the the ins and outs of how powerlifters in this case were conceptualizing the relationship between body composition and strength, but it does bring in a really interesting gender perspective. If you, let me see, I'm trying to think of a good way to get in contact. There's a great study out there. I'm happy to, if we figure out a way to get in contact, happy to send it your way if you're interested.
Yeah, I love that. Maybe you can share your email or something.
Absolutely, happy to.
Yeah, private message or whatever. Thank you so much.
For sure. I see another hand raised.
Okay, this is Haleli. I raised my hand. So I'm new to competing. I just competed in my first meet.
Congrats.
Thanks. A couple weeks ago, and I did cut so that I can get into a lower weight class. And I'm planning my next steps in my journey. And I'm thinking about cutting again to even a lower weight class. So you're catching me right in the middle of this whole thing. How do you make a decision about the pros and cons? You know, how do you balance the potential benefits of being in a lower weight class and having that advantage versus the loss in strength or, you know, other risks? Like, I don't know how to think about it to make sure I'm not making a mistake and then find myself down the road regretting it.
Yeah,
Thanks.
exactly. And that's what gets hard, really, because it's such an individual decision. And it's so, you know, what are you hoping to get out of the sport? You know, is it really, you know, that important that you get down to that lower weight class and try to see if you get that competitiveness from losing weight? Or, you know, will it make more sense to kind of maintain your weight class and just see how strong you can get there? It's a hard decision to make. It's like, I can't give you a, like, definitely go down or definitely go up. It's going to come down to you in the end. But what I do recommend is that if you do decide to go down the route of cutting weight, which again, like, it's fine for competitiveness. The thing that I would recommend anyone look out for is if as they're cutting weight, they start noticing, you know, I'm chronically tired. I don't recover very well. I'm always sore when I come into lifting. I get an hour into lifting and I'm just really exhausted every time. That's when I would start thinking critically about, like, is this weight class actually going to work for me? Is it worth it? And am I just going to hamper my own ability to get stronger over time? Those are the things I would start to think about, because what, you know, so many people in the study tended to do is to kind of pull away from gaining weight because they would kind of overlook these negative physiological signals that they were getting. That's where I would be concerned. That's where I'd like people to start paying more attention to. And if you do decide to cut weight, I think that's fine. Just be on the lookout for those things.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I see a question from Bryn.
Yes, hi, I'm Bryn, and I just recently started competing in weightlifting last summer, and I have been going down a weight class to where I'm kind of in between the 59 and the 64 naturally, but I do go to the 59. And with that, I'm not very experienced with cutting weight, like strategies. And so I've kind of adapted some other people's strategies and used some of my own. But I was wondering if you were aware of any resources on how best to do that, or what are some safe and effective strategies for doing that while still maintaining optimal health and performance as best you can, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I know that there are some good studies out there. It's like, I'm actually thinking of an interview that Weightlifting House did with someone who's kind of a specialist in weight loss strategies. And something that I remember the scholar brought up was fiber manipulation as something that people could do. As far as I remember it, fiber stays, you know, in your body for a significant period of time. And if you kind of manipulate your fiber intake, you know, kind of lower it as you're, you know, coming into trying to lose weight before competition, it's a good way to kind of, without hitting a hard caloric deficit, without really going too hard into water cutting, is a good way to kind of pull your body weight down without, you know, messing with your or with, you know, with your health, with your ability to recover from training too much. I wish I could tell you for sure on resources, but what I do recommend is, you know, don't try and cut too much too quickly. My big mistake was trying to cut like 3.5 kilos a week out from competition. That was not a good move. And to, you know, effectively just pay attention. If your body's not losing weight, I would really say stay away from, trying to lose every ounce of water you have in your body. The crazy sauna tricks, the hot bath tricks, stay away from them if you can, and see if you can lose it from less harmful and painful methods like fiber manipulation if you have the opportunity to. I wish I could give you better advice.
No, that's awesome. I actually haven't heard anything about the fiber manipulation before. So that'd be
Yeah,
thing to look into the research on that.
exactly. Yeah, I take a look into that and see what you can find, because so far as I know, that is probably one of the best ways to try and decrease your body weight without having to spit in a cup or, just not eat or drink for ages. So give that a shot if you can.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
There's a question that came in the chat.
Yeah.
What is a reasonable amount to cut and how quickly before a competition?
So from what I hear, and from what I can remember physiologically, you never want to lose more than 2 to 3% of your body weight specifically through water cutting. I know that's what a lot of people tend to do coming into competition, because losing that much body weight, via diet, if you're doing that right before competition, that's just not eating in general. Fiber manipulation, potentially, but most people tend to do it by just eating less and less and less, and that doesn't work. You never want to lose more than 2 to 3% of your body weight in water leading up to competition. That's where performance decreases start to happen. The rule of thumb that I tend to hear is try not to be more than 2 kilos over your weight class. It can be a little bit different for heavier weight classes, and depending on the amount of water weight you carry, but I feel like a good rule of thumb is generally try not to do more than 2, but it's going to vary from person to person. Yeah, Aaron. You may have your microphone muted if you're trying to respond.
There we go. Sorry about that. Can you hear
It's
me?
all good. Yep.
Yeah. I'm Erin, a master lifter, and I've been lifting for 7 years. And I just want to reach out to those who have had to cut and have those that we just spoke of decide to go up a weight class. Now I'm 51 and I'm participating in the world competition next week.
Congrats.
And yeah, thank you. And I just recently made a decision to go up a weight class because I wanted to get stronger. Did very well, and I was in 71. But to somebody's point, as far as how do you make the decision to go up or go down, I'd have to say, how long do you want to do the sport, and how long do you want to stay healthy? And it was my decision to stay healthy and do it indefinitely. My coach is 66 years old and looks amazing, and it's because of pay attention to your body and those warning signs of if you're changing your body, like you're saying, because of body composition and your goals aren't quite set right for you can have both, but longevity, if you want to stay in the sport, you should listen to your body so it doesn't break down. And I live with girls around me that fight this all the time, and I watch them with injury after injury, and they just can't fathom to go up a weight class. So I would suggest listen to your body, and it doesn't hurt to go up because you can't be afraid to gain a little bit of body fat. But if you have a good diet and a very consistent type of diet and lifestyle, you'll be happy to see the type of gains and strength. I mean, even at my age, and going through emergency hysterectomy and all that kind of stuff, it was a struggle, because at that type of thing that you have to deal with, that's probably another good thing that you could study. I'd be really interested in how athletes are doing with that. You just consistency, and I'm pretty happy. I mean, hopefully I can continue with the sport just because I made a decision to go up. And
Yeah.
it is, body image is one thing. I mean, to be honest, I quit the sport for about a year or two because I was standing in line at a Lowe's, and I'm like 5'5.5", and sometimes you have a resting face in line, and when somebody says, "Oh, I'm not going to stand in front of you, you're going to beat me up," and that does bother you. I'm pretty lean athlete at 71 or whatever I am, and so that kind of stuff is a stigma, and it is hard to to work past, but I think you just have to be true to yourself and know that it's a pretty cool sport, and we're not sitting on the couch. So that's all I'm saying.
Exactly.
Pretty.
Exactly.
So
And
that's
I
all
appreciate your story and, telling us about your, going up a weight class and the things you kind of faced with going through that. And what really stood out to me was something that I noticed a lot among the people I talked to who did go up a weight class, who, did feel like they were forced up, and they kind of went like, and I got so much stronger. And
Mhm.
I'm surprised, it was just this amount of surprise that people had when they went up in body weight. Maybe they gained some fat along the way, and then they got stronger. That was, just striking. It's like, yeah, it's like, we are here to try and get as strong as we can. It's like, yes, as competitive as we can, but that tendency to disconnect strength gain from competitiveness was probably one of the more interesting parts of this study that I did.
Right.
Yep. Any other questions for me about this?
Well, I think that might wrap up the questions. Monica, that was such a great presentation. I know that I learned a lot, and I hope that all of you joining us today also are able to take something away from this discussion. Just because this is the USA weightlifting event and because of the topic, I will recommend the Renaissance periodization. RP is one of our sponsors, and they do an app that's $14 a month that is great to use if you are looking to go up or down a weight class. Everything that they do is, based around performance. So I'm a big advocate for going up a weight class. So why not go up a weight class scientifically?
Exactly. Make sure you're eating enough. That's exactly. For sure. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much, Monica, for taking the time to provide us with this amazing presentation. Again, if anyone has anyone who was not able to join today, this session will be available on USA Weightlifting's website through the USAW Learning Academy on bars. Most likely it'll be posted by Wednesday or Thursday of next week, just because we will be running the Masters Worlds. So I'm looking forward to seeing anybody who will be competing this week as well.
All right. All right, thanks again to everyone for coming. It was a pleasure to get to finally share my research with people who can benefit from it, not just random academics. All right.
Awesome. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.